Hi, today we're going to talk about self-concept and happiness and why you're going to want to expand your self-concept if you want to be happier. The other day I did a couple of videos on self-esteem, and one in particular, the psychology of self-esteem. I talk about some concepts of the big picture view. There's another one where I talk about the tactics, and that's more about the bum to get high self-esteem. The first one, the psychology of self-esteem, I talk about the big picture view, because tactics on their own might help you, but if you have the big picture view, you kind of see what's causing it, okay? And it's a bit like if you're putting up a building, you use this structure, scaffolding to put the building. And then you take the scaffolding down and you see the building. So when you're being developed, when you're growing as a kid, that scaffolding is concepts about yourself. And then you don't see the concepts, but they're in the background. So you take away the scaffolding of the building. If your self-concept is kind of low, the building, the personality is not as high as it should be. Because the scaffolding, the infrastructure wasn't as high. Or we could say another way, so the foundation wasn't as deep. Take it whichever way you want to. Anyway, one of the concepts to talk about the psychology of self-esteem video is self-concept. What's self-concept? Carl Rogers was the big proponent of self-concept. He was a very famous psychotherapist. His idea is that self-concept has self-image, ideal self, and self-esteem in it. So self-concept is who am I, okay? And what exactly are these and how they work, okay? Well, the other day in that other video, I gave the example of Adolf Hitler having a big self-concept, okay? And he was pretty happy with himself, even though he wasn't a nice person. But his views about himself, he thought he was good. He thought he was great. So let's see how that ties into Carl Rogers' idea of self-concept. So what we have is, we have the self-image, how we see ourselves. We also have the ideal image. And when those two are congruent, it boosts our self-esteem. And these three together, the self-image, the ideal image we're striving towards, and then our self-esteem, gives us the overall sense of who we are as a person, our self-concept. The self-concept is who am I? That's your self-concept. Now, some psychologists think that there's a thing called congruency. They think it's really the congruency between self-image and reality. I'd rather avoid reality, because if you get 20 people see, say, an accident, and then they all go to court and they give their testimony, you get 20 different viewpoints, because everybody has a different viewpoint of reality. Reality is, although reality is objective, our perception of reality is subjective. Okay? So what I would rather say is, how closely does your self-image and your ideal image tally up? Okay? And it's pretty complex, okay? For example, some people's ideal self is not so big a deal. It's easy to achieve. Some people's ideal self is very difficult to achieve. Particularly, I've seen it if, say, for example, you have very tough parents who weren't good at showing their love, or they only celebrated you when you became first at something, won something. Otherwise, they wouldn't even notice you. Or that's how you perceived it, okay? So people like that tend to have a self-image is very perfectionistic and hard to achieve. And other people's self-image is more easy to achieve. Also, you might have fantastic parents, but you still come away with this. And I've met parents like this who are really nice people, and they wonder why my kid is so hard on themselves. So it's not always the parents. Sometimes the kid just, that's how their personality reacts to the environment. They have perfectionistic ideas. So whatever it is, whether it's the parents being too tough, or whether it's perfectionistic ideas they just pick up on, the self-ideal image is very difficult to achieve, okay? We're talking about people who, for example, they'll be upset unless they get like in the top, say there's a competitive exam, 100,000 people do the competitive exam. If they're not in the top 100 or the top 10 or something, they'll be upset, which is ridiculous. Or they have to be earning $1 million a year, or this or that or the other, whatever it is. So some people's ideal self is very difficult to achieve. The other thing is your self-image. Now, some people are very low-level achievers. Their self-image, he was a great guy altogether. I go to the pub every night, knock back a few beers, and my beer belly is not that bad. They have very high self-image, even though their capacity, etc., is low. And some of these people are pretty happy because their ideal self is here, their self-image is there. What you get is pretty good. It's easy to satisfy that. And then you get other people whose self-image is very low, and maybe they are low achieving, or maybe they're high achieving, but it's still not good enough. They just, I only made $10 million last year, and everybody else that I know in my circle made $20 million. And so they're very hard on themselves, okay? So their ideal image is up here, their self-image is down here. It's not good. So congruency, forget about reality. Who cares about reality? Reality is what you make it. Congruency is self-image heading towards ideal image. And that's why in life, things like when we fall in love, or when our career is going well, or our academics going well, or our sport is going well, we tend to be, our self-image is heading towards the ideal image. Maybe never reach the ideal, but we're heading in the right direction. There's congruency. The two are heading in the right direction, and you feel good. And when things are not going good, you're not getting towards your ideal image, you're going the opposite direction, then we tend to feel bad. And so self-esteem is actually just a rating system. Self-esteem is just how we rate these experiences. So that's the Carl Rogers picture. So the self-image, ideal self, and self-esteem together create a self-concept. As far as I can tell from reading the material, you might read the material of a different perspective, but this is from what I can see. Now, I have a slightly different perspective. My perspective is that you've got the self-image and ideal self. The level of congruency between them creates self-concept. And obviously, if the self-concept is high, self-esteem is high. If self-concept is low, self-esteem is low. So what I would see in daily life is that there's two main kind of people who tend to have a low self-concept. And don't take my words too literally. I'm not making a generalized statement. There's an infinite variety of possibilities. But let's say there's two obvious examples I see. One is a person who comes from a family where there's not much joy, whereby they're always studying or they're always working as kids, and they don't have a quantum of pleasure. Your quantum of pleasure, as far as I can see, in the first 8 years of life you develop your personality, the amount of joy you have in your life, the amount of pleasure you have in your life is usually inversely proportional to that early life. Now, it's not universal. There are some people who have a lot of fun late in life and not early in life. But for a lot of people, it would appear to me that if they don't develop a capacity for joy and pleasure early in life, they won't develop it late in life. So we have some people, for example, who never develop much of a sex drive. We have some people who can't sit still. They can't relax. They can't watch a movie. They can't enjoy themselves. And then we have other people who can have a lot of joy. Now, lounging around, enjoying movies, eating chips. I'm not advocating that for everything, but there has to be certain capacity to enjoy and have pleasure in life if you want to be happy. The other example I see is people who have a lack of personality development. I've seen some families, for example, whereby nobody talks, nobody engages. Kids always have questions, but these people never answer them. So after a while, the kid stops asking the question. They just watch the TV and nobody talks, and they never have original thought. And people like that often have a situation where nobody in the family has a decent personality, and the child never develops their personality. Now, there are two kind of extreme examples, and there's a million variations, because we can also have a look at self-concept, somebody who's capable of enjoying themselves, has a nice personality, but somewhere along the way, they're very limiting self-thoughts about themselves. And that's another, say, third example. And I think most of us perhaps didn't come from a family that never had joy, didn't come from a family that didn't have personalities, but most of us are stuck within I have lots of concepts about myself which are self-defeating and limiting. I think most of us are in there, but we could also be in the other side as well. The point is, whatever it is, if your self-concept is lacking, and I feel that self-concept is more about self-image, congruency with ideal image, if that is lacking, then the person will tend to limit themselves and find it difficult to have an expanded sense of life and enjoyment and so on. So if a person has a self-image and a ideal image, which are very congruent and somewhat big, expansive, then the person will have more possibilities for enjoying themselves. I'll give you an example. I was watching an interview of Patrick Stewart, Jean-Luc Picard, that actor. And he was talking about he's in his 70s, it's arthritis in his hands, and he's getting some cortisol injections into the joints. It's very painful. And when it was happening to him, he remembered his acting training. He was taught at the time to see every experience as something to be observed. Don't think it's good, don't think it's bad, observe it. So I don't know whether his acting teachers realized this, but this is basically like a kind of a Buddhist sort of technique of just observing, or Zen technique maybe, of observing reality without judgment. And what he found is when he did this, although the pain was there, the suffering wasn't there. It wasn't as bad because he could just observe, here's the needle going in. This is the feeling of pain. What's pain? What's that feeling of pain? What's going on now? So he would just observe it like he wasn't personally involved. He's like a third person observer of his own experience. He's observing without judgment. And it obviously helped him get through a painful procedure. That's an example of a bigger version of a self-concept. Okay? Now, I don't know what the overall self-concept of Patrick Stewart is, but I'm just saying that's one good example. Let's say, for example, give another example. Let's say you're waiting for the train and the train is late by a lot, maybe a few hours, or you're waiting for the ferry, or you're waiting for the plane. I think we all had this situation at least once in their life, whereby the train, the plane, the ferry, whatever is late by 5 hours, 10 hours. Most of us get very bored. And I've had a few times happen to be, and I've always been very bored, so I can't really say I'm a good example of it. But there are examples of people, they'll take out the cards, they'll start playing cards, they'll go for a walk. There's so many pigeons out here. I never saw so many pigeons. And look at the landscape, okay? So this is all examples of people having a bigger self-concept. In other words, they're finding ways to entertain themselves. Whereas I see other people whose self-concept is so limited that things have to be very ideal. And I think it gets back to this, how I think about myself, my self-image, or my ideal image. They got ideal image, which is very difficult to reach. It's very perfectionistic. They got a self-image, which is probably either low or very limiting, a limited self-image. I can only be happy when I do this. I'm only happy when I do that. And the result is that person finds it difficult to be happy. They're only happy under very, very limited circumstances. Does it affect their self-esteem? Of course it does, because there's no congruence. You got this very high ideal self, a very low self-image, so they're never congruent, and there's a lack of integration between those, and the self-image, of course, is very limited, and this is very hard to achieve. It's very perfectionistic, so obviously it's going to impact their self-esteem. And this gets back to the Hitler example. Okay, Hitler's self-image was, I'm great. Hitler's ideal image is, the fatherland, the Ubermensch, all this sort of stuff over here. I am the Ubermensch. So there was manic phases when Hitler was way up there, and he felt great. And according to the Americans, I think it was, got a psychoanalyst to do a report on Hitler, and it's a very good documentary I saw before. You might find on YouTube somewhere. And he suggested that he would crash and burn because he had all sorts of neurotic problems, and that he identified himself with the fatherland. And once things went badly, he would go back into the bunker, as it were. And that's where he ended up, in the bunker. He would retreat once things did badly. So he had many flaws, and in the latter stages probably suffered a lot. But for a while there, he really was on a high, because these two are very congruent. Total incongruence with reality. I mean, they're terrible ideas, but he was very satisfied, okay? So why I feel self-concept is very important, and my idea of self-concept, I'm talking about your self-image must be big, and your ideal self, and that's it, should be down here, but it shouldn't be too perfectionistic. So this should be, this should be an expansive self-image, and this should be a realistic ideal image, okay? And there should be a congruence whereby a good bit of the time you're heading in that direction, because for a start, your concept of your self-image is pretty broad about the things you like and who you are and what makes you happy. And also your ideal image is reasonably achievable. You don't have to like win the Olympics to be happy about yourself. And if those two are congruent, that you've got a fairly big self-image and a fairly realistic ideal image, well then you're going to be happier. Now I have another video called Don't Run After Happiness, and I say that happiness is a side effect. But yeah, these are also factors in happiness, which is basically your self-image, your ideal self, the congruency, and then of course the effect on self-esteem, because your self-esteem is a rating system. How am I getting on? Am I congruent? Am I, my ideal and ideal self and self-image congruent? And then I'll have high self-esteem. So what to do about it? You can change. Some of it's limited, okay? And I've got a cure for that as well. But let's say at this stage, what's the most important thing? Try and expand your self-image of yourself. Try and become more broad-minded. Try different experiences. If you're already very easygoing and joyful, great. If you're not, just try different experiences. Try and enjoy a movie for a change. Try and sit still and not be always busy and see how it feels. Try for a change to do something like that. So try with repeated efforts to expand the image of yourself. And you can do all the other good things I talk about, like diary writing to learn about yourself, positive self-suggestion, visualization, good mind feed, self-help books, videos, courses, etc. And get nice people in your life as well. So you can try all these things and broaden your perspective about who you are as a person and what makes you happy. Okay, so that you're not always required to be number one or debt-free or whatever. Say, for example, debt-free. Oh, it's impossible to be debt-free in today's society. And if your happiness is today I'm debt-free, well, you're debt-free today, and next month you're probably back to a loan again. So the whole thing is how to be happy despite it all. Okay, so you can work on expanding that self-image. Also, if you're very perfectionistic, work on making that ideal image a bit more attainable. Okay, don't make it so hard on yourself to be what you need to be, what you want to be. Don't put standards which are very, very difficult to reach. I'm not saying you should be low achieving, but be somewhat, more realistic. And if you have difficulty with that, write about it, diary write about it, write about your thoughts and your feelings. You might go and try some therapy. You might have some intelligent conversation with your friends about it, or you might just, like I said, diary write and so on. And you can use positive self-suggestion and all that good stuff as well. And in case you still find all this difficult, the final straw, the final thing I would add is be philosophical. Because it's very difficult to change certain structures of yourself. But you can always respond rather than react. You can always become self-aware. Oh, now I'm being restricted again. Okay, so for example, let's say I'm quite a shy kind of person. And, if you ask me to stand up and sing or dance or something, I wouldn't mind standing up, singing and dancing if I could dance really good or could sing really good. But if I'm forced into a situation whereby it's some kind of, like a group party situation, oh, we're all going to go up and dance and you have to stand up and do something silly. I hate it. I hate making a fool of myself. I'd love to stand up on stage if I had something prepared and I was brilliant and I knew I could knock the socks off people. But just some kind of, it's a party, we're all going to go and play and do some stupid games. I hate it. I really hate it. I hate it. I feel like a complete fool. I don't like it. But although I still hate it, and that shows a limited self-concept for me, that my ability to switch off and be a moron for half an hour to keep everybody happy and myself happy in some kind of group event. So that's a restriction of my self-concept. But at least I can self-philosophize, and I'll try and avoid it, sure. But if I have to do it, I'll go, oh, okay, I have to do this, something silly and stupid. I hate it, but I'll get over it, okay? So we can philosophize. So to summarize, how happy you're going to be is depending upon how big your self-concept is. The bigger your self-concept, the happier you're going to be in all situations. And the self-concept is based upon how big your self-image is, how realistic your ideal self is, and how congruent the two are. And that's going to help with the self-concept, okay? So if you want to be happier, we can all be happier, we should all strive throughout life to develop our self-concept. Okay, please like and subscribe if you found this good. I'll talk to you next time.